Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm discussing Hey Arnold, created by Craig Bartlett. The series premiered on Nickelodeon on October 7th, 1996. It ran for a total of 5 seasons with 100 half-hour episodes, the last of which aired on June 8th, 2004. And obviously, I don't need to tell you how amazing this show is, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Oh my gosh, I love this show so much. If it weren't for Rugrats, this would be my all-time favorite Nicktoon. But this is my second favorite because I just love Rugrats that much. But oh my gosh, this show is so incredible. And revisiting it as an adult, it holds up so well. Such strong, poignant writing, such wonderful characters with so much depth to them, such a wonderful world and relatable themes, and just an amazing series. And the character of Arnold, in fact, originated in a series of claymation shorts, where the creator of the show, Craig Bartlett, back in 1987, he was working on Pee-wee's Playhouse, and then he created these claymation cutaways about a character named Penny and her friend Arnold. So then from there, he created shorts just centered around Arnold. And the 3 shorts were Arnold Escapes from Church, which was released in 1988, The Arnold Waltz, released in 1990, and Arnold Rides His Chair, released in 1991. And that last one aired as a filler short on Sesame Street, which I did remember, but I saw it years later, I think probably when Hey Arnold was already airing. But with those shorts, it's interesting because obviously the style, they're claymation, but Arnold still got the classic football head and the blue hat and the yellow pointy hair. But in the shorts, Craig has said that Arnold is only 5 years old, and also he never talks. It's all about him and his imagination. Just kind of in the church one, for instance, sitting bored in church and just thinking of all these things, or him going on a ride in the chair. And then also, Arnold was featured in comic strips that appeared in Simpsons Illustrated magazine. And the only one I've ever seen on the internet was one that Craig has described with, again, Arnold doesn't speak, and it was just Arnold at an amusement park, on a roller coaster, just all these things and not reacting at all. And then when he goes home and he just screams. So that's really interesting. And then the actual pilot for this series is simply titled Arnold, and it was shown in theaters before Nickelodeon's first feature-length film, Harriet the Spy. And that short was then reworked as an episode of the series, 24 Hours to Live. So in that short, it's a lot of the same voice actors, and what's cool about this show is that the voice actors are, in fact, kids, and that is inspired by the old Peanuts specials where those characters were all voiced by children. And Craig has said that he wanted to do that because part of that inspiration, but also because it adds authenticity to the characters. And so in that pilot episode, which then became 24 Hours to Live, where Harold just says he's going to beat Arnold up, and then you got Helga just counting it down. 16 hours, 32 minutes, and 17 seconds till you die. Oh my gosh. So, I was really young when this series premiered, but my earliest memory of it, I will say, was actually, I was just kind of entranced watching it, and it was the episode The List, when Arnold decides to have the perfect Saturday, and he just wants to do all these things, watch TV, eat sugary cereal, ride his bike, play catch with every kid in the park, sit through a movie 3 times. And I was sitting way too close to the TV because I was so entranced by just the shapes, I guess, with Arnold, his football head, and specifically the part when he's riding down the steepest hill in the city on his bike, And I was just so caught up in it staring, and my mom had to tell me how to move away from the TV, sitting too close. Oh my gosh, this show, it's so incredible because the characters feel so realistic and they go through hardships, and it's relatable to childhood, that not everything is wonderful and sunshine and happy all the time. There are hardships that we all face growing up and just part of life. And so I loved this show so much when I was younger, and I appreciate it so much now, like so many Nickelodeon shows. But there's just something so truly special about this series. And of course, it's set in the fictional city of Hillwood, and Craig has said that it's an amalgam of large northern cities that he's loved, including Seattle, which is his hometown, Portland, which is where he went to art school, and Brooklyn, the bridge, the brownstones, the subway. And that's one of the many things that sets this show apart. That's not kids in the suburbs, it's kids growing up in the city. So that's really cool alone in terms of the aesthetic and just the world of this series. And of course, another thing that sets it apart is the incredible music. The series composer Jim Lang, he composed the theme song, and the theme song is amazing, so catchy, and it's kind of like that West Side Story vibe with the boys walking down the street and the girls walking down the street. And it's great that there's no lyrics to it. It's just only Helga just saying, Arnold, hey Arnold, just only Arnold, and move it, football head. It's great. And the closing theme song is great, Stompin'. Love all that music. It's so part of the DNA of the show, setting the tone of the series and all of the ups and downs in life and all of the depth to it, and the melancholy, and just that soulfulness, and of course the jazzy beats, the upbeat stuff as well. It's beautiful. And also, before Craig sold the Arnold pilot, he was also working at Nickelodeon on Rugrats. He worked there as a story editor, and he directed a couple episodes, wrote a few episodes. Well, he directed specifically the episodes Graham Canyon and Stewmaker's Elves, that one, I think that's what it's called. But he created Cynthia too, which is really cool. And Arnold himself is based on Craig and just his childhood and how Craig had a really vivid imagination. So Arnold is a daydreamer. And there's so much to admire about Arnold specifically, even though, of course, most people's favorite character, and mine too, is Helga G. Pataki. She's an incredible character. So much complexity to her, because on the surface she is a bully, but as we know, as we see throughout the series, there is much to sympathize with her character. And just watching this show as a kid, it took me on so many different emotions. Like, certain things I related to, certain things just seemed so surreal. That's what's great about this show, that it is ingrained in reality, and yet it has moments of surrealism that set it apart, specifically with all of the urban legends. And yet it's still just about the tribulations of growing up. And yet always underlying is that ray of hope. So while it does deal with heavier topics, it still always has that optimism shining through. So truly an amazing series. And what's interesting is, with the first episode of the series that aired on October 7th, 1996, Downtown as Fruits and Eugene's Bike, both of those episodes open with Arnold daydreaming, and then in that first one it's Helga saying, "Hey Arnold," and then in the second one it's Gerald snapping him out of it to snap him out of his daydream. And what Craig originally wanted for the series was to establish that Arnold is, in a way, this reluctant hero, because he finds himself in these situations where, through no fault of his own, that at the end of it, he feels he has to make it right. But with the daydream specifically, he quickly did away with those because it would interfere with the 11-minute structure of the episodes and establishing those 3 acts. And that would be, say, 30 seconds or so of story. So then he eliminated that. But it's funny seeing that, how that's because with the title, since they're saying, "Hey Arnold," it's like snapping him out of his daydreams. Because as a kid, interestingly, my interpretation of the title was that it was always people asking Arnold for advice, or him giving advice, since he is in many ways, the conscience for every character pretty much that he's interacted with, whether a kid or an adult. So my interpretation of it was like, "Hey Arnold, you gotta help me out here," or "Hey Arnold, help us." Like, not about Arnold the character, but the fact that he is so helpful and kind and compassionate. But really, the title is just, "Hey Arnold, snap out of it." But there's many ways you could look at it. So just a simple title like that, as a kid, that was my interpretation of it. Just, "Hey Arnold, we need you." And Arnold really is a wonderful protagonist. Yes, he has his flaws, but that's just the thing. No one's perfect. Even though he is, compared to other characters in the series, arguably not as flawed, really, because you look at a character like Helga G. Pataki and we see all of her faults much more clearly, but then underneath that bully exterior of hers, we see her true mushy side, since she's so head over heels in love with Arnold. And as a kid, it's funny because in season 1, my interpretation of her feelings for Arnold was that she genuinely did hate him. Like, she didn't want to love him, but she couldn't help it. But there's just so much complexity there, and it's a huge part of her character, the fact that she loves Arnold and she's hiding that secret. But there's so much more to her character that makes her so interesting and sympathetic. But just in that first episode, how it establishes that she's the boss and they're doing that play and they're stuck downtown as fruits. And there's just so many great moments in that first episode. And just especially that relationship between Arnold and Gerald, those 2 best friends. How Gerald is like the epitome of a cool, awesome, loyal best friend. And then we see already Arnold with him feeling bad that they were going to ruin the play, and then his kindness and his virtuous side when they accidentally are confused because they're dressed up as the banana and strawberry, and then those criminals show up, and then thinking that's them, gives them the money, and then Arnold then paying it forward, giving the money to that family whose car broke down, and then that woman saying, "Wow, people downtown sure are friendly." But then when they show up and they're singing their song, it's fruits, that song. And then similarly in the episode Eugene's Bike, where Arnold accidentally ruins Eugene's bike, and then he just rebuilds it overnight because Arnold is just incredible like that. But then again it gets destroyed, and then he wants to make it up to him. And he takes him out to have a fun day. And what's cool about that episode, too, is that when Arnold does the Heimlich maneuver, and then Craig Bartlett has said this, that on 2 instances, at least, that he knows of, that there was one where a girl saved her sister's life doing the Heimlich maneuver, and she had learned it from Hey Arnold. So that's incredible. That really is. So then she got to tour the studio, I believe. That's amazing that this show, it has such a positive influence. And I have to say, rewatching these episodes, I watched not as many as I would have liked, to be honest, but I watched some of my all-time favorites. And I watched a lot, actually, specifically from season 1, because I'm watching on Hulu, and then it would just go to the next episode. I was like, oh, this one's great too, I gotta just watch it. So I watched some more from season 1. And arguably, I would say some of the most classic episodes of the series are in season 1. For instance, Operation Ruthless with the cheese fair, where it's established that Arnold has a crush on Ruth P. McDougal, the 6th grade girl. That's funny too, how Arnold seems to go for the older ladies. Also in the episode 6th grade girls, when they go out with those girls, Connie and Maria. Like, those girls just invite them to go to the dance with them because they want to make their boyfriends jealous. And then also there's that episode where Arnold has a crush on the substitute teacher, played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus. That's really cool. And that episode, just by the way, that one's interesting because by that point, Craig Bartlett had said that was when they started getting letters from fans. So in that episode, there's a few meta things where they address clearly, I guess, questions they would get from fans. Where at one point Helga says, wait, what is his last name? Because throughout the series, we never knew Arnold's last name, even though it was there the whole time, which you would, if you've seen the Jungle movie, you know. But also, and Craig has confirmed it though, it's not, okay, it's Shortman. Can you imagine I'm spoiling that for you years later? Yeah, that's a big revelation. That's no secret, is my point. So, his last name is Shortman, and Grandpa always called him Short. What's the matter, Short Man? So, but also in that episode when you see that Arnold, it's his shirt underneath the sweatshirt thing that he always wears because it looks like a kilt, and people always thought it was a skirt, which I must have thought that too as a kid. But then seeing that episode, it's like, oh wait, that's his shirt. That was such a bizarre thing. And then also he says that too in the episode Cool Party. It's like, well, it's my shirt. But anyway, I'm derailing. Back to Operation Ruthless, when Arnold is just excited to talk to Ruth at the cheese fair. And it's funny how throughout that whole season, Ruth never talks or anything until the episode Arnold's Valentine. It's always just him admiring her from afar. And it's like in that episode where he says that you ever think about how someone's different in your head until you actually get to know them. So it's, in a way, him just coming up with this idea of her that he has a crush on. But he never actually talked to her or anything. He just sees her and likes her. But it's just so funny, that episode when he's like, oh, okay, I'll just go up to her and say, hi, Ruth. Yeah, that's it. Like, that's like the greatest idea to him, like the greatest line. He's like, hi, Ruth. Hi, Ruth. And you already know the episode, but then when later he's just like saying it like a mantra. Hi, Ruth. Hi, Ruth. Hi, Ruth. Oh, gosh. And then even at the beginning, though, with Phoebe, it's like, if you spin around, hold your breath, and look through this Swiss cheese, it'll guide you towards your true loves. And of course, when Helga does that, and she's looking at Arnold, and then when she sees him looking at Ruth, and then she says, oh, that little yellow-haired runt, I ought to squash him like a bug. And it just turns into her squashing the cheese and looks like a spider. I like that little visual gag. But in that episode, though, establishing what Craig Bartlett has said, that Helga's biggest flaw in terms of her wanting to get closer to Arnold is that she just acts like a bully towards him because she's masking her feelings. So then her running her mouth, calling him names, and then acting so cruel because she is embarrassed and hiding her feelings, and she has a lot of growing to do in that regard. But also, of course, as we know, with her home life, which is a whole other thing. But it shows, though, how that behavior isn't rewarded. How throughout that whole episode she's trying to get to Arnold, and then it's not working out for her. And then that part with all the mirrors, and then when they're on the bumper cars, and they crash into the weenie stand thing, and then when they go in the tunnel of love, and then she just by herself, it's like, tunnel of love. She just hits Brainy with the oar. Of course, that's a hilarious running gag anytime she goes into her romantic soliloquies and the string music is playing and she pulls out her locket, staring at the picture of Arnold, and then all of a sudden Brainy breathing, and it's just so hilarious too. And I found out years later that Craig Bartlett voices him, so just doing that deep breathing, and she just punches him right in the face every time. But then at the end, how when Arnold's saying, yeah, but you know what, Gerald, the challenge just makes me like her even more regarding Ruth, and then when he walks away, and then Gerald and Phoebe holding hands walking away, and then just the lights go down and it's just Helga standing there by herself. So it is a downer ending in that case for Helga. But most of the episodes, they end on that lovely, hopeful note. Even in the list, when Arnold has a terrible Saturday because he put so much pressure on having the best Saturday, nothing went right for him. And then when he's on the roof, and then Grandma, is up there playing the piano. And she's like, oh no, it's wonderful. We're going to have a piano on the roof. And then when she starts singing the song to cheer him up, and watching it now, I got teary-eyed watching it. It was just so sweet. When life gets you down, don't look away, look up. It's just beautiful. It's just a beautiful little song. When you're feeling under the weather. It's just beautiful. I love it. You gotta take things as they come, because memory's true. Go out of the blue. You know the way. Look up. Whatever the words are. But just like that symbolism with the random truck that crashes and then all the balloons flying, and then Arnold just grabs the balloons, and then when he lets them go, and he just kind of waves at one point, and then she says, what do you say, Arnold? One more time, Grandma. He takes out his harmonica. Which, what happens to that harmonica, by the way? He had that in season 1, and then it just kind of went away. That aspect of his character, playing the harmonica, but and that's just a nice lesson, though, in that whole scene and in that song. Just keep looking up. So that's really sweet. And even also in the haunted train episode, when Arnold, Helga, and Gerald go check out the train after Grandpa tells them about it. And then when Brainy just shows up at one point and Helga just tosses him overboard. Like, nope, get out of here. Oh, gosh. But that episode's great because that trio with Arnold, Helga, and Gerald. And really that's the only episode with just those 3, because then once in a while they would have also Phoebe, which is great too. The 4 of them. But I'm surprised they didn't do more stories with that trio, because in the marketing of this show, that seemed to be like those were the main 3 characters they would show. But that one's great too. Also, I love the episode Field Trip, when Arnold and his grandma rescue Lockjaw the turtle. When Arnold is talking about Lockjaw, saying, oh, his water's all dirty and kids throw stuff at him, and then grandma's just fixated on, and he's old. And then when they bust him out, they clean up his shell, and they send him to the ocean so he can be free. And it's just so sweet. And the music in that episode is just so absolutely gorgeous. One of the many truly beautiful scores from Jim Lang in this series. Another one that actually, in fact, moves me to tears, I will say, is in the episode The Baseball. At the end when Mickey Kaline retires, and at the end when Arnold catches the ball. And then when he's saying how I wish I could make it up to Mickey, he's done so much for me. And then when he's just playing catch with Mickey Kaline, so you want to hear a kid, like you just say kid, and he's just like throwing the ball back and forth. And that music, though, in that scene when Mickey's looking around, like this was his whole life, and now he's retiring, and it's sad for him, but then he has this fan, and oh my god. This show, it's incredible how this show can be so deeply moving. And also it has its fair share of humor too. But what really makes this show stand out to me are the moving, poignant moments. Another one, of course, Pigeon Man, absolutely classic episode. And you know that stupid internet rumor that Craig has debunked many, many times, that the internet rumor was that at the end, Pigeon Man was going to commit suicide, but that it was deemed too dark by Nickelodeon, so that Craig had to rewrite the ending. And Craig said that was never true. That was never the case. It was always Pigeon Man flying off with his pigeons on his next adventure. And it's so gorgeous, too, that entire scene when, after those kids destroy all of his stuff, Harold, Stinky, and Joey, and then when Arnold says, this wouldn't have happened if I hadn't, encouraged him to go out and enjoy himself. And then Pigeon Man's saying how some people like me just aren't meant to be with people. He understands and trusts birds, but not people. And then he's telling Arnold, don't be sad. You've taught me that some people can be trusted. It's just so touching and moving, and just this beautiful, lovely insight into the human condition, and how Arnold, it's beautiful how he has that ability to draw goodness from people, see their best qualities, get them to open up, and he's always the optimistic one who believes in people. Of course, also in the episode Stoop Kid, another absolute classic. Stoop Kid's afraid to leave his stoop. But then when he encourages Stoop Kid to literally take that first step, conquering your fear, to leave his stoop, and then he's telling him, you can do it, I know you can. And then, of course, encouraging him with his favorite book. And it's just so wholesome, too, with Stoop Kid reading that book, Little Engine That Could. And he's like, I think I can. Wow, what a great book. So sweet, of course. And then just when he steps off his stoop, and then his lesson, now I can harass people from my stoop and from off my stoop. And then Arnold's like, well, gee, that wasn't really the point. Because it's great when he has those moments of, well, what are you going to do? Even in the episode Eugene's Bike at the end, when the door closes on Eugene's hand of the bus, and then he's like, I'll give it to you tomorrow, his Mickey K-line card. So it's just, Arnold can only do so much, but he does obviously help people in so many ways. And then there's the episode Arnold's Hat, where seeing how much that hat means to him, of course, because it was given to him by his parents, and that he doesn't feel like himself without his hat. Because Helga just wanted, like, I'll never get the hat, never, never, never. And it just lands in front of her, hey, Arnold's hat, I knew I'd get it all the time. Oh. And then that shows one of her many, many Arnold shrines in that one. And that one is with his used gum. And then she just kisses it at one point, like, oh, Helga. Her obsession is quite the infatuation, to say the least. Poor Helga. That's just funny when she's like, all I want is the hat and world domination, but right now just the hat. Is that too much to ask? Then when she realizes she has to go find his hat, but then it ended up at the dump when her mom's like, oh, dear, I threw it all out. All her stuff in her closet. Oh no. But then when she finds the hat conveniently and then gives it back to Arnold and he hugs her, she's like, what do you think you could do? You could touch me. I always love when he hugs her, and then she has her moment of, like, where she does her sigh and then she just snaps out of it. She, like, slaps herself across the face. Like, that's enough. See, it's sad for Helga that she feels like she has to have this facade because she doesn't know how to express her feelings in a more healthy manner, other than with her, she has a creative outlet with her poetry and her shrines to Arnold, but then she goes to the extreme of being cruel to just mask her feelings, and also because she doesn't have any role models or any healthy relationships, since her own parents have their own issues and of course neglect her, where Big Bob is this angry blowhard and her mother, sadly, is an alcoholic, which, of course, something that completely went over all of our heads as kids, but now we see it so clearly with her smoothies, quote-unquote, that she's just kind of always moping around the house, Miriam. And then, of course, there's Helga's older sister, Olga, where in that first episode she's in, Olga comes home, and you see how much the parents favor Olga and how they more often than not even call Helga Olga, or just frankly don't even remember Helga's name, which is just so devastating. This poor girl who's so smart and precocious and arguably even more gifted than Olga, but then because Olga was always a winner and having all these trophies, just like in the episode Spelling Bee, when you see all of her trophies, and then Big Bob is like, oh, I saved that one little spot right there for you, and then when she just purposely loses because he gave Arnold the check, and she's like, I can't believe it, he didn't think I could do it on my own, and she purposely loses. Q-U-A-L-X. Because she wants her integrity, and because Arnold deserved to win. But then in Olga Comes Home, how it's established that she and her sister basically don't have a relationship. Her sister is away at college, and it just further shows that Helga feels like she doesn't exist with her family, and she's jealous of her sister. But then she just makes her sister, he changes the grade to the B+, and then her sister's crying hysterically in her bed all day when her parents are like, oh no, not now, Helga, not when your sister's in her room all depressed. And then when she's like, criminy, even when I get her out of the way, she still manages to wreck things for me. And then when she confesses that she's the one that changed the grade, and then it's a nice moment between them when Olga's saying, well, I could tell them I should do that, but I'm not going to do that. They don't need to know everything that goes on between us. And then when she says, hey, what are sisters for? I don't know. I love that. But I do like their relationship, even though on the surface it's Olga, this perfect sister, and Helga in the shadow of her perfect sister. They do have their moments where Olga really tries to listen to her, even though she has her own issues too, when she's saying how you're lucky mom and dad ignore you. I always have to prance around and perform for them all the time. I get really sick of it. So in that moment, it's the two of them understanding each other. And then there's that part where it just flashes blue for each of them. It's like saying, oh, how about we spend the day together, just you and me? And then Helga says, okay, that'll be nice. And Craig Bartlett had said that the point of that was to establish kind of, oh, are they going to be friends or not? Just kind of like take a pause to show that. And by the way, just to give a shout out to Aaron Mehta of the Aaron Mehta Show, because a lot of these little tidbits I'm sharing are from Aaron's interviews with Craig Bartlett. He has a Hey Arnold anniversary episode on his show each year, and he has Craig on and he interviews him and he asks questions from the fans. So big shout out to him. And also, while I'm giving shout outs, gotta give a shout out to Sylvie of the Vacant Lot podcast, which is her Hey Arnold podcast. And she also now has a writing podcast, Sylvie's Soul Writing. Highly recommend that as well. And I've had Sylvie on my podcast. She was my guest when we discussed Rocko's Modern Life Static Cling. Also, big shout out to Stacy, who I've had on the podcast as well. I've interviewed her. She wrote the book Hey Arnold's Guide to Relationships. Also, a big shout out to Patricia of Old School Lane. She has some really wonderful interviews and videos about Hey Arnold. She's interviewed Craig as well. Also has this great video about the history of the Jungle movie that I highly recommend. And also, I want to give a shout out to Casey and Ashley of the Friday Night Nicktoons podcast, which has ended, but they have some truly wonderful discussions about this series. They're big fans of this show, and they have an episode, for instance, where they broke down the Pataki family. They did an episode about Big Bob, about Miriam, and one about Olga. And they have just really insightful conversations about this show and these characters that we all grew up watching and that we all can relate to in many ways or sympathize with. So shout out to all of them. Check out all of their stuff, because there's just so many great content out there in the fandom of this show. And then, of course, another classic episode, Arnold's Christmas. You know it's absolutely amazing when Mr. Wynn is reunited with his daughter. It's so unbelievably touching. But even more touching is the fact that it was Helga being Arnold's guardian angel. And something I noticed years later was that Helga, when she's standing in the snow at the end, and then she whispers, "Merry Christmas, Arnold." And she's barefoot. She's just in her socks. That means that she worked all night with that Mr. Bailey guy to find Mr. Wynn's daughter. And then her whole speech is wonderful, too, when she says, if you go home now, that little football-headed kid will never believe in miracles again. And that's what changes his mind, because she loves him so much that this is her truly being selfless and caring, because that's all the qualities she admires about Arnold, his selflessness and the fact that he wanted to reunite Mr. Wynn and his long-lost daughter, and that she gives up what she wanted, those Nancy Spumoni snow boots, because that was the last thing on the guy's Christmas list. And then that's what changes his mind, to help another kid not lose his faith, because that's so Arnold, with his head in the clouds and idealistic and always seeing the bright side and always having hope. So then it's the ultimate reward in that he did something kind and reunited the two of them, and it's just so touching and beautiful. It's an incredible Christmas special. And I also always loved Arnold's Valentine, when he finally gets over his crush on Ruth. But then, of course, there's the whole thing with Cecile, and then it's Helga pretending to be Cecile, his pen pal, and then when he just at the end, there's just one thing I don't understand. Who are you? And it's like, how can you not know, Arnold? But whatever, And it's just kind of that Cinderella thing where she's got a shoe and then he's got a shoe and he's just staring out at the end. But it's funny when then he gets over his crush when he's talking to Ruth. And she's voiced, by the way, by Lacey Chabert, a.k.a. the voice of Eliza Thornberry. And also she played Gretchen Wieners. And never Gretchen Wieners, bye. I can resist. But when she's going on, it's like, everyone knows who Anonymous is. And then she's just flirting with the busboy. Then she's like, I love breadsticks. Do you like my hair? I do like your hair. It's just whatever. She's just kind of vain. And so him realizing that he wants someone with more depth, with someone he can have a connection with. And I didn't mention any voice actors yet. Arnold, as we know, he went through several voice actors since they're all kids, then they would go through puberty. So season 1, he's voiced by, in the series, he's credited as Torrin Caudell, but he now goes by Lane Torrin. So for the sake of consistency, I'll go with that, Lane Torrin. And then in seasons 2 and 3, he's voiced by Philip Van Dyke. Seasons 4 and 5, Spencer Klein. And then the last 2 episodes of the series, he's voiced by Alex D. Lintz. So as a kid, I remember every time I got a new voice, I'd be like, why does he have a new voice? Like, it would bother me because I'd be so used to his other voice. But now, it's not a big deal, but because then I'd get used to it. It doesn't really matter. But now, when you watch a bunch of episodes in a row, then kind of you see the different qualities that each voice actor brought to the character of Arnold. And you could also argue that it was partly from the actual evolution of the character, the writing, and how the show progressed. But my interpretation so it's funny, my sister and I just call it First Arnold, Second Arnold, Third Arnold. So First Arnold, Lane Torrin, the original voice of Arnold season 1, he, in my opinion, his biggest quality with Arnold is his soulfulness. Like how he's so laid back and he is a deep thinker. So that's the kind of qualities he draws out of Arnold. And then Philip Van Dyke's version of Arnold to me is the sweeter, more naive Arnold. And then Spencer Klein's version of Arnold is the more serious and the more morally righteous and really the more stickler for wanting people to do the right thing. But then, of course, you got Francesca Marie Smith, who was there right from the beginning, like many of the voice actors, but I believe Craig has said that she was the first one they cast, and then I believe she was 8 or 9 at the time when he cast her. So then he's decided, okay, then it's going to be all other kids. We're sending it around this girl, and it's going to be all kids. And she does so well with all the different qualities of Helga, just the brashness of Helga, and then of course the sweet side when all of a sudden she's melting and doing that fluttering sigh that she always does. And the gorgeous, beautiful soliloquies, which a lot of that went over my head as a kid, all of the stuff she would say about Arnold, just going on. And I always loved the and yet, and then like look to the right, look to the left, and then she pulls out the locket. I always loved that. What's frustrating too as a kid, just to touch on that, was how, to me, because what Craig has said, that her flaw was just the fact that she's so mean. If she was just more open and relaxed and just was normal with Arnold, not like being so overly cruel for the sake of covering up her feelings, going overboard with that, then they would just get along easily and he would just naturally care more for her. Not that he doesn't care, but since she's so mean to him and pushing him away. And he does see, though, obviously, he sees that she has that soft side, that gentle side, that he knows deep down she's not such a mean person that she portrays herself as, that he sees the goodness in her like he does with everyone. But that's something really I saw more with second Arnold, with Philip Van Dyke's version. Because season 1 Arnold, it's not that he doesn't know she exists, but he's just... that's part of his character too, though, that he's very dense with that stuff. And Craig himself has said that, which I agree, that especially when you're growing up in elementary school and stuff, that girls tend to be leaps and bounds ahead of boys in that regard, of crushes and things like that, and boys are a little slower to pick up on those things. But then, I mean, Gerald, voiced by Jameel Walker-Smith, and Phoebe, voiced by Andy McAfee, they had their little relationship that was never, not relationship, but that they both clearly liked each other, even though it was never overtly stated in the show. But then we saw it in Operation Ruthless when they're holding hands at the end, and them dancing together in various episodes, things like that, and how they just clearly liked each other. So that's cute. And then, of course, Arnold's grandparents, Grandpa Phil, voiced by Dan Castellaneta, and Grandma Gertie, voiced by Tress MacNeille. And one of the many things I appreciated about this show was, with the older characters, with the parents, that they had their flaws. They weren't just one-note parent characters, or with the grandparents, one-note characters. They had all of their unique qualities about them, like with Grandma being an ex-cop, when she goes to save them from the subway, for instance, in that season 1 episode. I love that one too, when they're singing at the end, let's all hold hands here on the subway, because we've been stuck here in the dark for way too long. I love that. And when he helps her save the Circle Theater, that one's great too. And then, of course, Grandpa always having his own words of wisdom for Arnold, even though Arnold has his own sensibility and his own moral compass and his own way of helping people himself. But Grandpa with his wisecracks, but knowing how to talk to Arnold and help him out whenever he needed it. And so many great Grandpa episodes too, like the one where he thinks he's going to die because 81. It's like, oh, the curse is 91, not 81, you know. And then, of course, all of Arnold's classmates, which I also loved too, how there was such diversity and how there was so many different episodes dedicated to each of the classmates and how they were all fleshed out ancillary characters. Harold, for instance, voiced by Justin Shankaro, how first he comes off as just this bully, but then he has his own insecurities and his own sensitivity, like when there's that cat and he just, I'll call you Cupcake, that episode's great. Or when he steals the ham and then he comes to find that when he has to work for Mr. Green, the butcher, and then he comes to find that he enjoys doing that. Or with his bar mitzvah. And then, of course, there's also Big Patty, and she's a great character because the two of them kind of like each other, and that's really cute. And it's cute, too, though, when she's introduced, and then when Helga's just making fun of her, and then she's saying, I'm gonna, beat you up, and then she's just, pretending, though. She's like, I gotta make it look good. Make it look good. What are you talking about? And then she's saying, well, really, your friend Arnold is the one who convinced me not to beat you up. And she's saying, hey, you two got a thing for each other. Which, that's interesting that she even points out, you two, not just her, but the two of them, they got a thing for each other. When Arnold says how it's she's mean to me too, I usually just ignore it. And then when Big Patty's saying, well, he said you have some unresolved conflict or something, he just knows, again, that Helga's not so bad. But then it's sweet when she's like, okay, not really, sell it. So then Helga does that for her, pretending she really got beat up badly by Big Patty just to save her reputation. And then, of course, there's that episode when Big Patty helps out Rhonda in polishing Rhonda. And Rhonda, I will say, voiced by Big Patty, voiced by, first off, Danielle Jodovitz, and Rhonda Wellington Lloyd, voiced by Olivia Hack. Rhonda is one of those characters that I appreciate more so now, because yes, she is a snobby rich girl, but she's really smart, really astute, and she has her own dry sense of humor that I appreciate. She's a great character. The episode Wheeze and Ed is funny when she's paired with Sid, and Sid's great too, voiced by Sam Gafaldi. But in that episode when they're just playing the throw the ball game at the pier, and then when he says you throw like a girl, and then she says, well, you throw like a short kid with long hair and a backwards hat and a big nose or something like that, and then he says, no, I don't. But then I also just love that episode too, on a random note, when Brainy shows up and they're like, Brainy, what are you doing here? Something. I love that. But see, just the bits of humor just always makes you laugh. And speaking of, a moment that always makes you laugh is when they go to that cave and then they think, when they see the counterfeit pennies, and then those two criminal guys show up, and then Sid's like, it's Wheeze and Ed and some other guy. I love that. Oh man. But going off on a tangent, back to what I was saying about Rhonda, in that episode, Polishing Rhonda, when they're at that manners school and Big Patty does everything so beautifully, and then Rhonda's like, I'm actually going to fail, and Big Patty's going to graduate. So then she learns from Patty how to be a person of character and have morals and manners and be polite and conscientious. And then they establish a real friendship, and that's really, really sweet. And then Sid, Craig Bartlett has said that he always liked episodes with Sid just falling apart because his voice actor Sam Gifaldi would just always break down, and it would just always be so funny with the tear, like him breaking down. He said it would be funny, so he would just write that in with Sid just crying. Like when Arnold saves Sid and then Sid feels he's indebted to him. Or that episode when Sid thinks Stinky's a vampire. Or that episode when Sid thinks he accidentally killed Principal Warts with the soap voodoo doll. Like, just Sid with his odd beliefs. Or also with him being obsessed with germs. And Stinky is a great character too, voiced by Christopher Wahlberg. I like the episode Yahoo Soda, just drink it, when he's feeling down on himself. I guess I'm not special after all. When they just hired him to be the Yahoo Soda kid because he's just so plain and ordinary. And then there's that moment at the end when he catches the ball in the cup because Arnold convinces him that everyone's special in their own way. And then he's saying, well, I turned down $1 million, so that makes me special, my pride. And I also like the episode when he's growing the pumpkin, and there's that joke. It's like, oh, rain, sleet, snow, and all in the same week. And of course, Eugene's a great character. And he had a few voice actors, one of which was Ben Diskin, who voiced number one and number two from Codename Kids Next Door. You know, Kids Next Door, battle stations. Yeah, you know. But Eugene, just, you know, the jinx. But then it's funny when in that one episode when he thinks Arnold is the jinx. It's like, you know, Arnold, you're a jinx. When he's like, oh, when we both got stuck on that roller coaster, when you broke my bike, when you killed my goldfish. And then when Arnold's saying, I'm going to throw you a surprise party, whether you like it or not. Poor Eugene. And then, of course, there's their loving, wonderful teacher, Mr. Simmons, who always sees the best in everyone, too, voiced by Dan Butler. And they first had Miss Slovak, but then Craig retired that character because he didn't like that she was kind of a cliche. It's like a teacher not wanting to be a teacher, but then so on the opposite, you have someone who cares so much about his students. And I like that episode when he's first introduced, and then the kids feel bad, though, when they pull pranks, and then they get Mr. Goose at one point. It's like, you, take the other corner. Why? Symmetry! And then when they go to apologize to Mr. Simmons, and he's so touched by their kindness. And he's just a wonderful, sensitive guy who, it's also sweet how he always encourages Helga with her poetry, but then lets her stay anonymous. And then, of course, Helga's family, Big Bob, voiced by Maurice LaMarche, Miriam, voiced by Kath Soucie, and Olga, voiced by Nika Futterman. And with Big Bob, I mean, it's interesting because he and Helga do have a lot of similarities, and they do get along here and there, like in the episode Quantity Time, when at the end he feels bad, he wants to make it up to Helga, so then he takes her to see her show that he thinks, because she's got the magazine clipping, and it's got her WrestleMania show on, and then on the back it's got what he thinks she wants to see, which is Rats the musical. And then it's like, oh gee, Bob, what a nice surprise. And then it's like, great, I gotta sit here for this stupid musical for 3 hours. And they're both laughing over how terrible it is, and they're like, oh, pipe down, you weasel. So it's nice when they actually bond like father and daughter, because for the most part, sadly, we see that he's just this loudmouth jerk who's only cares about Olga and his beeper empire, which that's funny too. Beepers are so obsolete now. And then, of course, sadly, Miriam, who is just clearly depressed. But then there's that episode when she and Helga go on the road trip, and Helga kind of finally bonds with her mom, saying, there's so much about you I don't know, Mom. And then she's just getting to know her better on a more personal level. And then there's also the episode Beeper Queen, when she goes to fill in for Bob, and then she's working so much that at first it's great, and then she gets lunches, but then she's focusing too much on that, and Helga's saying, I need you for a minute, Mom. And she's saying, oh, well, there's no time, go do your homework. And then when she sees the playback, and then she realizes she needs to be a better mother to Helga. And then, of course, we have the boarders who live at the Sunset Arms boarding house with Arnold and his grandparents. And I love on the side of the boarding house those signs, no kids, and then pets, okay. So Arnold doesn't count, I guess, but it's also funny every time Arnold opens the door, there's either animals running in or running out, just the cats and dogs, and Arnold's pet pig, Abner, also voiced by Craig, by the way. But there's Mr. Wynn, there's Ernie Potts, the demolitionist, there's Oscar Kokoschka and his wife Susie Kokoschka, who have a not-so-great marriage, to say the least. But those stories are always interesting about the boarders and how, though they aren't a conventional family, that they are a family in their own way, all of them. But then even stories with Oscar and Susie, that first one where Arnold plays Cupid, and then at the end when Oscar is actually selfless for once, not being selfish, when he just says, you keep the money. And then, of course, more of Arnold's classmates. There's Nadine, who is Rhonda's best friend, and she loves insects. There's Peapod Kid, also voiced by Jameel Walker-Smith. And it's funny that his name is Peapod Kid because he doesn't have an actual name. That's just his name because he was dressed as a pea pod in the Downtown as Fruits episode for the play. And there's also Lorenzo, who's only in a couple episodes, but that episode when Sid is embarrassed of his room, so then he uses Arnold's room to impress Lorenzo because Lorenzo is so rich. And Arnold's room, of course, I'm sure every kid wanted that room growing up. He's got the skyline, he's got the lights, he's got the stereo. It's just an incredible room. He can go up on the roof. He's got the cool bed. He's got his potato, hey Arnold, his potato clock. Amazing room. Then there's also the 5th graders who are bullies and led by Wolfgang. And it's so funny because years later I learned that he's voiced by Lane Torren. So it's just hilarious that Lane Torren first having voiced Arnold and then going from that to the stark contrast as a bully and making fun of Arnold. And of course in that episode, Longest Monday, when the 5th graders just throw the 4th graders in the trash. And then when he gives that whole speech, though, it's just funny, though, when you know that he was the original voice of Arnold. You could hear it here and there a little bit when he gives that whole speech, like, well, consider the consequences, like all of that, and I'm going to throw you in the trash after all that. But that one's so funny, too, when they have their little safe haven trying to hide from the 5th graders. And there's that kid, Park, who he doesn't really have... He's just kind of more of a minor character, but that's really his biggest thing in the series. He has that safe haven for the other 4th graders. And then there's that part when Helga is acting like a therapist for Harold, and he's like, and then they picked me up and they jammed me in the trash can, and she just smacks him across the face. She's like, oh, get over it, you big wuss. That's fantastic. That always makes me laugh, too. Oh, goodness, her with her violence. And then, of course, always when she punches Brainy, that's just always funny, too. Then there's that one part I remember when she's just like, oh, hey, Brainy, in that episode when she takes the love potion, or thinking that it's to remove love so that she doesn't love Arnold anymore. So then when she doesn't punch him and she walks away, and then he just like, he's like, no, he just punches himself in the face like he can't take it. He needs to be punched. He's so used to it, I guess. What's hilarious, too, though, just speaking of Brainy, the fact that he doesn't talk much, but here and there, he's just like, I don't know. It's like little lines here and there. But I'm thinking, like, how many times, like, Helga's punched him and how many times she's shattered his glasses. So I wonder how many times, like, I wonder if he just would go to the ophthalmologist to get a new pair of glasses, the optometrist. This would have been interesting because Craig has said he wanted to do a Brainy episode, so that's one of the stories he didn't get to tell, but... Just funny, too, that he's just always there, Brainy, breathing, always there to interrupt her beautiful monologues about Arnold. So he's one of the few, of course, that know about her love for Arnold. I'd say crush, but I mean, it's a bit more than that, wouldn't you say? But there's him, of course, there's Phoebe, there's also Lila. And Lila, I will say, I know most people don't like her. I never actually minded Lila personally. I know she's introduced as this Miss Perfect in that season 2 episode, Miss Perfect, but then we find out about her hard home life, how her father's struggling to support them, but then he gets the job, and so they see that she doesn't have it as well as they think, that even though she's this happy, sweet, friendly girl, she has her own hardships. And then, of course, people don't like her because she's an obstacle between Helga and Arnold, because Arnold has a crush on her, or he develops a crush on her, really, in that Arnold and Lila episode, and only because Helga erased her name and wrote Arnold loves Lila on the wall. And then when he's like, oh no, this can't be happening, I think I like her. That I like you stuff in this show, oh my gosh. Then her whole Lila saying, the only reason I liked you is because I thought you liked me. And then he's like, so you're dumping me, aren't you? Just like stating the obvious. It's like, not in so many words, you're dumping me. Poor Arnold. I will say that episode, the last scene of that episode, when Helga just falls out of the tree, it's like, Helga, what are you doing here? And it's like, oh, just climbing trees, good healthy exercise. And then when she's like, oh, so I couldn't have helped overhearing that Lila dumped you. And then he's like, uh-huh. And then she just drops all down. She's like, you okay, Arnold? And then he's saying how when you like someone and then turns out they don't like you back, it hurts. And then when he says, you ever felt that way about someone, Helga? And she's like, me? Of course. What? No, what are you? Don't be ridiculous. I mean, of course. But then it's like, oh, can I walk you home? So that's a sweet moment. I will say that scene always stood out to me as a kid. Like, to me, watching that scene, it felt like a step forward in their relationship, in their friendship, and just in kind of pushing them together a little more. I don't know how to explain it, but just that was my interpretation of it as a kid. And there are a lot of sweet moments between them, obviously. Also in that episode, when Helga thinks she has monkey nucleosis and that she's going to expire. And it's so funny, too, when she just takes the book and it just says, like, debunked illnesses or something, and then, like, she has all the symptoms. And then at the very end, when she's like, oh, I'm not going to expire, and then Arnold's like, that's great, Helga, but what were you going to tell me? And she's like, well, nothing, that you're just a dumb football head. And then when he's about to leave, and then she's like, Arnold, wait, I just want to say that you're an okay guy, and I just think you're okay. And then he touches her. He's like, thanks, Helga, you're okay too. And he pats her arm. I always liked that scene as a kid. And my interpretation of it now is that I feel like whatever she would have said in that moment, he would have said it too. Like, if she had said, you're not so bad, he would have said, yeah, you're not so bad either. Like, he kind of matched her sentimentality there. And speaking of that, like the matching, I feel like I'm going on tangents, just bear with me. But in terms of the voice actors, I know like Lane Torrin and Francesca Marie Smith are still friends to this day, which is sweet, and a lot of the voice actors are still friends, like Andy McAfee and Francesca and Olivia and Justin Shanker, like they're all still friends. I believe also Philip Van Dyke is still friends with them, and Jameel Walker-Smith and Lane Torrin are good friends. So that's really sweet that these voice actors playing these kids and obviously spending a lot of time together doing their voice sessions, that they're friends in real life all these years later. So that's really sweet. But what I was going to say was that in terms of the chemistry between the voice actors, there's this something I can't describe between Lane Torrin and Francesca Marie Smith, that they feel like they're more on the same wavelength in terms of the connection between them. And it's just, I guess, just that natural chemistry. But then with Philip Van Dyke and Helga and Francesca Marie Smith, like voicing Helga and Arnold, I like that interpretation of Arnold with, as I said, him being sweeter and him really seeing the soft side of Helga. And it's funny, too, that it's interesting how these voice actors who play Arnold, it's like they know Helga likes Arnold, but the character doesn't know. It's just interesting to me, all that stuff. How, like, everyone knows except Arnold. It's just interesting. I don't know. But then, of course, there's so many what Craig calls Helga retrieval episodes. The first one of which being Little Pink Book, when she just drops her book and then it ends up with Gerald's books. And then, of course, when she signed her name on the last page, and then they're trying to figure out who wrote the book, and then at the end means reading H is for the head I'd like to punt, and then she just takes the page out and throws a spitball at him. And then there's Helga Blabs It All when she's just high on Novocaine from the dentist, and then she has to get the tape back when she left a voice message on his voicemail. Remember cassette tapes? 90s kids? For voicemails? And Craig has always said at the end of that episode, when she's just backing out, it's like the horror music, and she's just slowly backing out, no one says a word about it, and none of the boys say a word, and then Arnold's just like, so about the go-kart. And I also love the episode Helga's Parrot. That one's so funny, when the parrots are reciting all of her poetry. And at the end, when that monitor lizard just eats the parrot. Or the episode Helga's Locket, when she has the locket inscribed, and then she has to go into the boarding house to go get it back. And then at one point, she's just pretending she's just dressed up, and then Grandpa's like, oh, and you forgot your mustache. So dumb. Or when she sleepwalks, confessing her love to Arnold. So it's interesting how she's just tormented by these feelings, poor Helga, and she wants to confess to him, but then she's scared that he may not feel the same way. And so one of the many reasons she puts up a front, because she's not ready to tell him, and she's scared. There's many moments, though, when she's kind of close, or she considers it, but then she just loses her nerve. Like even in the episode Magic Show, where it's a parody, basically, of It's a Wonderful Life, when it's Helga envisioning what life would be like without her, and that her parents actually get along, and that no one cared that she was gone, so that she has to change her ways, and that she shouldn't have been so hard on Phoebe. And then at the end, when she's talking to Arnold, and she's like, Arnold, I'm sorry I made fun of your magic and the shape of your head. And then, first when she's going to apologize to all the kids, and they're like, free Yahoo sodas. And she's like, hey, you slobs, I'm apologizing here. But then when she's talking to Arnold, and he's like, what? I'm listening. And she's like, well, I just want to say that you're a weird-headed geek. Man, what a joke. Like, she just loses her nerve. Always with the insults. But then I also have the moments when she just jumps into his arms all the time, like in the episode Save the Tree. She's just any excuse to jump into his arms. Or all the times when they crash into each other. I mean, that's gotta hurt. They really just, like, smack into each other so often. And he always offers to help her up. So cute. So I always loved those episodes regarding Helga's feelings for Arnold. These feelings, and yet she's obviously so smart and confident, and even though she doesn't always express herself in a constructive way when she's a bully or screaming at people or getting angry with people all the time, because she certainly has her temper on her, but she doesn't cave to peer pressure. She just is very much her own person, like in the episode with the makeovers, but then she decides, well, maybe I'll try it with the makeovers, and then she has all the makeup on, she plucks her eyebrows, and then finally she realizes, this isn't me, I don't want to wear a mask, and why are we wearing these shoes, we're already taller than the boys. So she doesn't want to be quote-unquote girly. And then the boys, well, really Harold's teasing her, oh, you're not girl enough. Poor Helga. So really I just love all the nuances and complexities of Helga's character. And I understand people don't like that she's a bully, but since we know her and her home life and how she has a lot of growing and learning to do, that if she were only a little bit nicer, but she'll grow up and she'll learn. After all, they are only 9 years old. Oh, another character, of course, that I haven't mentioned yet, Curly, and his real name is Thaddeus, like Curly Gammelthorpe, whatever his full name is. Curly's amazing. I love that episode Curly Snaps, when he just goes crazy because he was supposed to be the ball monitor, and he just has a crush on Rhonda. And Olivia Hack apparently ships them, but personally, I kind of shipped, I could see, I don't know, but the fact that Rhonda secretly liked Harold, I found that interesting. Like in the Operation Ruthless episode when they go on the Tunnel of Love ride together, and then she's like, oh, you know you like me, Harold, because Craig Bartlett has said that Rhonda secretly likes Harold but is too cool to admit it. But if it weren't for Big Patty, I mean, she and Harold are just such a lovely pair together. That episode Hey Harold, when they're just bonding at the party, and then first he's embarrassed because they're teasing him, but then he just sits with Patty at lunch and he just says, if you make fun of me, I'll beat you up, it won't be even funny. So I do like their relationship, Harold and Patty. And I always just liked the more serious topics they touched on in this show, like in the episode Mugged, when Arnold's grandma teaches him about discipline, and then that metaphor with the fly, saying, don't go looking for trouble and let the fly come to you. She's like, oh, something like that. That's cute. And also the fact that the kids are always outside playing, like with the vacant lot episode. We can call it Gerald Field. And then when the adults feel bad that they took it over, then they clean it up for the kids again so they can use it for their baseball field. And the episode Mud Bowl is funny when the 5th graders challenge them to touch football. And I will say, that episode's hilarious just on a personal note, because my mom would just always see that episode for some reason, like every couple months or so. She'd be like, I never see this show, and then this episode is always on. And so I will say my favorite Wolfgang line from that episode, just because my mom always loved it too, was when he says, you're going to show up on Saturday, all of you. You're going to play football. You're going to lose, and you're going to like it. I love that. Oh my gosh. And then it was funny too when they had that other new bully character, and then he was voiced by Philip Van Dyke. His name was Ludwig. What a coincidence. Ludwig von Beethoven and Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. So that's funny too, that when they went through puberty, and then Craig would say, well, we'll bring you back as a bully. So there you go. And then there are so many great episodes with all of the kids, like as an ensemble. I love the episode What's Opera Arnold, which is homage to What's Opera Doc from Looney Tunes. But when they go to see Carmen and they're all singing, and it's just fantastic. And Curly, that voice actor, he can really sing. But I just love how they're singing to all the tunes of Carmen. And then I will say, one of the funniest scenes in the entire show to me is in the episode Cool Party, when Rhonda is having a cool party with only the cool kids, and then Arnold's invited, but none of the other kids are invited. And then Harold, like, all of them one by one saying, I bet I wasn't invited. Like, first Harold saying, I bet I wasn't invited to Rhonda's party because I'm fat and loud and obnoxious. And then Sid saying, I bet I wasn't invited because I've got a big nose. And then Stinky saying, oh, it's not that big, Sid. And then Sid says, thanks, Stinky, but you're only saying that because you're the biggest honker in the whole city. No offense. Like, just one by one, just them saying all their faults. It's like, oh, yeah, we don't eat chicken except Curly. Yeah, and that was only one time. Like, just rattling off one thing after the next. I find it so hysterical. And then afterwards, when they're throwing rocks at a dumpster, and then where they're saying we should go crash Rhonda's party, and then Curly just says we should go paint tiger stripes and go free all the animals at the zoo. And then Helga just saying, like, okay, Curly, we'll meet you there in an hour. And then he just goes running, maniacally laughing. And then she just turns to them and says, poor twisted little freak. Oh my god. So I find that all hilarious. And then when Arnold has his geek party, I love that too. It's just great. I also loved all the parts where it's just an easy joke, but I always got a kick out of it. Where when one character would say, Helga, for instance, saying, there is no way I am riding the subway. I can't believe I'm riding the subway. Or in the episode Grand Prix with Arnold saying, there is no way we are calling our go-kart the Mauve Avenger. I cannot believe we are calling our go-kart the Mauve Avenger. Or even Gerald too saying, there is no way I'm fishing in a swan boat. I can't believe I'm fishing in a swan boat. It's just, it's just a silly joke, but I always got a kick out of it. Just the smash cut into the next scene where the character was clearly talked into it. And then one of my favorite episodes as a kid was always School Play. That's a half-hour episode, and that's when they're going to do Romeo and Juliet. And what's funny is that was my first introduction to Romeo and Juliet, and then I didn't read it until I was in 9th grade. It was my freshman year of high school. So then I was like, oh wait, I know this from Hey Arnold, like finally reading Shakespeare. But of course the whole thing with Helga wanting to kiss Arnold, and then it's like the perfect plan for her because it'll be acting. And then I just love the scene in the beginning though, and she's like, why don't you take a picture, it'll last longer. He's just staring at the green gelatin. He's like, I'm just wondering what this green stuff is. And she's saying, who cares what it is? It's green, it jiggles, it's in a dish. If you're gonna eat it, put it on your tray. If not, move along. And then she just like smacks the trays. And then when he says, Helga, I don't know why you have to act so mean. Deep down, I bet you're a nice, sensitive person like everyone else. And then she's saying, oh, what do you know? I'm bad as they come. He's like, whatever you say. I always liked when he said that, whatever you say. And then Gerald would say that too, though, whatever you say, Arnold. Or also when he would just say, you're a bold kid. And I have to mention with Gerald, how the fact that he is the keeper of all of these urban legends with the kids, like even with the episode Longest Monday with the 5th graders throwing them into the trash, or of course when he tells the story of Stoop Kid, or Big Caesar, or Wheeze and Ed, that he has all these legends, and then Sid sets him up. It's been passed down from kid generation to kid generation. And it's just the wonder of storytelling. I always loved that too. So that alone is so cool about Gerald. But then there's relatable things about him too, like when he confides in Arnold that he can't ride a bike, or that episode when he has to lose his tonsils, and then of course it was that meta line. It's like, your voice sounds different, but you're still the same. That he had the deeper voice by then, but then they still kept the same voice actor. So anyway, with school play, I love how Helga has to one by one knock out all the other Juliets, first with Rhonda, and then Sheena, who's also voiced by Francesca Marie Smith, and then Phoebe and Lila. And of course, I love that scene that Craig Bartlett has said he loves the scene too, with Lila and Helga. And first she's trying to do all the other methods that worked with the other girls, like the costume or remembering lines or all the violence in the play. And then she's like, look, I have to be Juliet. And then Lila just figures it out, like, isn't it any chance because you like Arnold, is it? And then she says, oh, because if it were and you wanted to kiss him or something, I could understand that. So it's kind of like manipulative, but just genuine, though. It's like, oh, well, that's ever so sweet. And then when she just confides, she's like, well, if I said that, then you'd swear, otherwise I would strangle you with my bare hands. And then she just kind of like throws up her hands and like shakes her hands, and she's like, I like Arnold. And she does that whole spiel like, I love Arnold, I'm loop-de-loop in love with the boy, happy now, happy. I always loved that scene as a kid. I was like, yes, finally, Helga, express your feelings, doesn't it feel good? And then she's like, I kind of had a funny feeling you liked him. And then it's just, all right, so can I have the part? Sure, thanks. Like, that's it. And the actual play is just so sweet. Except with Mr. Simmons, like, that rival guy who, how petty is that guy, Mr. Likelighter, to just be like, oh, I'm going to criticize this 4th grade play? Like, calm down, buddy. Goodness. But then, of course, it's just so touching. And then Arnold has to remember his lines, and Mr. Wynn's helping him. It's like, I will help you, I'm dramatic. And then Grandpa Phil says, that's a polite word for what you are. All the bits of humor are great. But then at the end, when she just finally kisses him, she's kissing him and kissing him. Oh, gosh. And I always love the very end, too. Where now, though, when she's saying, my interpretation of it now, when she's like, oh, except for that kiss, I practically threw up. And then when Arnold's saying, why'd you kiss me so long? And she's like, I was acting, football head. I was trying to be professional. And he just says, whatever you say, Helga. So my interpretation of that now, it's like, it's interesting that she brought it up purposely just to kind of gauge his reaction, but of course she's gonna act with animosity towards it, like, oh, that was so disgusting. It's just cute that Arnold is dense about that. I mean, even there's that episode Girl Trouble when she pours the paint on him and then he gets angry and he pours some paint on her, but then when Grandpa's saying, oh, sounds like she likes you, Arnold, and then we see that flashback with the mean girl Gertie, and then it turns out it was Pookie. It's like, yeah, you were like, oh, look what a cute little girl I was. That it's a parallel with Phil and Gertie and with Arnold and Helga. Even though there are much more constructive ways to express yourself without all the teasing and mockery, but obviously that's one of Helga's biggest detriments, that she's standing in the way of really becoming closer to Arnold. Because then there's the episode Arnold's Thanksgiving, where they really just kind of confide in each other, that they're not having such great Thanksgivings because Helga is always feeling like no one pays any attention to her, no one even knows she exists, and no one cares about her, and Arnold's feeling like he just wants a traditional Thanksgiving. And then when they go to Mr. Simmons' house and they see how rough it is and how mean his family is, and they see, well, maybe we don't have it so bad. And then Craig Bartlett has said that when Arnold is standing out there outside Helga's house and he just says, Happy Thanksgiving, Helga, that's kind of like an answer to the Christmas episode when she whispers, Merry Christmas, Arnold. So that's really sweet. I do also love, because we have Arnold and Gerald's best friend dynamic, and of course there were times when they fought though, but then of course they always make up, but love that dynamic. And then I do like Helga and Phoebe with their dynamic, But that episode, Phoebe breaks a leg when Helga's just taking too much advantage of her, and then Phoebe just takes it too far, pretending her leg is still broken. And then Arnold acting as her conscience, which he does with many of the characters, saying that that's not the right way to go about telling Helga that you want to be treated better in your friendship. And it's great too, though, with Arnold as the conscience, also for the adults, as I mentioned, like, of course, with the boarders or with Coach Wittenberg, that episode when they're getting remarried. And I never noticed how, like, bizarrely he talks. Like, he's like, I do, also, repetitively. Psychology, just the bizarre things he says. It's interesting. But then when Arnold's like, what's more important, winning or your wife? And that episode's so cute, though, when Arnold is his best man and Helga is the maid of honor, and then she catches the bouquet, and she's like, I do not want you to touch me ever again, football head. Okay, just drops her. And so, for me, one of the biggest things that I most admire about Arnold and his character is how he's able to just talk to people and listen to them and give them the advice that they necessarily didn't even know they needed. And how with his own morals and good principles and his own honesty, that he allows them to have their own self-reflection and make the right decision with just that gentle pushing from Arnold. There's just so many instances of that throughout the series, like when Grandpa Phil admits that he never graduated, so then he goes back to middle school to get his diploma. Or also with Dino Spumoni, I hadn't mentioned him yet, who's basically a Dean Martin type character. He's got all his hits. Darling, you left my heart in pieces on the floor. And you better not touch my gal or I'll pop you in the kisser, pal. Like in that episode when he fakes his own death, and then Arnold's saying how, well, you threw your life away, and then now someone else is living it, you're realizing your life wasn't that bad. So it's amazing how he has that ability to communicate so well that it gets into people's heads and really changes their ways and makes them better people. That's just an incredible gift. We need more Arnolds in the world. People who will see the best in you, will draw that out of you, who help push you when you're not living up to your true potential. And so really, though, as his character evolved too, he became more of that toward the end of the series. So maybe in that sense, though, he was kind of less like a kid, because really in that first season, he still had that good blend of still feeling like a kid with his own flaws. Whereas then, as the series progressed, there's that episode when he decides he's not going to give advice anymore, and then everything just goes haywire with Helga giving her bad advice, and then he's saying, well, you guys didn't want my advice, you didn't want me butting in, but then he finally gives them advice because they're all desperate, and he says, well, first you have to apologize, and all that stuff. So I just love that he sees the good in people, and that he himself is so good and virtuous and wholesome and caring and kind. Just keep listing adjectives. It's true, though. So then that really is a good balance with the kind of character Helga is. And I mean, as a kid, I was just always so like, oh, when is she going to confess her love to him? But then I always knew that that would have been kind of the end of the series in a way, because that's so part of her character. So that's why I thought with the movie, I don't really want to touch on the movie because I'm not a fan of Hey Arnold, the movie, but I will say at the time feeling betrayed by it because I always thought that they were going to get together. It was very misleading because they really amped up the whole Helga confession. And one of my least favorite things about the movie, again, I don't want to be too negative here, but just in general, I will say I'm not a fan of the movie because it's so plot heavy. And what I mean by that is that it feels like you could just kind of take any characters and just, oh, we're saving the neighborhood from gentrification. So it didn't really feel so unique to Hey Arnold, outside of the typical things, well, let's up the stakes, and was outside of Helga just confessing her love and all that. And also by then, that's when it's funny, like, because I hadn't seen the movie in a really long time, then I first watched it again a couple years ago, and I was like, oh my goodness, I barely remember any of this, and it was just bizarre. And then I was surprised how different his voice sounded. Like, he had a really deeper voice by then, Spencer Klein. But yeah, I wasn't a fan of Hey Arnold the movie. I know that it was originally meant to be a TV movie, and then ironically, Jungle Movie was supposed to be in theaters, but then we got that as a TV movie. But that's okay. That thankfully made up for it. So I would have been more lenient if it had been a TV movie. But yeah, it just wasn't as good as I would have hoped it had been. And then watching the movie in theaters as a kid, I remember I just hated the ending when Helga just took it all back. And I remember thinking, Arnold, how could you be so dumb? Of course she loves you. But then, because when you say, oh, you really don't love me, right? You actually hate me. And then she just kind of snaps. And she's like, of course I hate you. And then it's just the heat of the moment and whatever. And she just skips down the street. And Craig Bartlett had said that they had to return to some sort of equilibrium. So that was why they just kind of pushed it aside. Be like, that, pretending that didn't happen. So then years later watching that scene, then it's so obvious that it was Arnold giving her an out. But I didn't realize that as a kid. I was like, how could you be so dumb, Arnold? But really it was just like, that was too intense. We need to just kind of pretend that didn't happen. We'll address it another time. So that's... So my whole point with that being that I felt misled by the movie, and it was just very devastating at the time. And it's just so funny how I get so invested in these fictional characters, but because they feel so real in many ways. And we just love these characters. They're amazing. Just a few other episodes I wanted to touch on. I like the episode Arnold visits Arnie, his weird cousin. And that's so funny because Craig Bartlett has said it was just inspired by an off-model Arnold. So then they made a character based on that. But then with Arnold, when he has that dream, it's just kind of all of the doppelganger, opposite versions of his friends, with Stinky being articulate and, well, their other names, Stumpy and Fifi, and then Kid and Gerard. It's like, oh, 11 cents, boy, howdy. So you gotta cool it, Gerard, just the opposite of all of them. And Rhoda and Harry. How many times do I have to tell you, Harry? I don't care what I look like. And then Hilda. And then Arnold just falls in love with her immediately, so that's funny too. And there's Lulu, Arnie's girlfriend, who has a crush on him because in the show, Lila has a crush on Arnie, so it's a bit of a love octagon there. That's too many sides. Love triangle? No, more than that. Love rectangle. Because Arnie likes Helga, I think? Yeah. But I do like that episode. I also always like the episode Beaned, when Helga pretends she has amnesia. And what's hilarious is that when I first saw that episode, I missed the first third of it. So I would always see it at the part where where Miriam walks in. And she's like, good morning, Helga, how are you feeling? So then it's just so funny when she's pretending to have amnesia because she was like, oh, Arnold took care of me. And then I just didn't know what had happened before, so it was bizarre. It was just a really bizarre thing. It's like, oh, wow, Helga, you're doing great. And she doesn't realize that all the things she had done, using the spoon correctly. So it was just a bizarre way to see that episode as a kid for the longest time before I finally saw the full thing. And then when she's pretending, it's like, oh, of course I do, Cheryl. Talking to Harold. It's like, and she called me Cheryl. Oh, goodness. But then at the end, when she feels bad, of course, and then she just hits her head on the drinking fountains, and then she's acting like herself again because she kept calling him all these different names. She's like, I'm fine, Arnold. And then when she's like, you don't have to do that, Arnold, when he offers to walk her home, he says, I know I don't have to, I want to. And she's like, oh, he offered to carry my books. A little moment, of course, of swooning. I did also always like the episode Married, another half-hour episode, when Rhonda has that fortune teller thing, which that took me back. Those paper things you would open and close, we used to make those too in elementary school. Actually, I was never good at folding them. My friends would always have to do it for me, and then we'd put the little colors, and we would put fortunes in ours, though. It wouldn't be names. It wouldn't be oh, who you're gonna marry. That was what MASH was for, that game MASH. But it's just hilarious when, of course, Arnold gets Helga. He's like, one more time. And it's like, no, Arnold, you said it 110 times. You're going to marry Helga. Live with it. And then she's like, oh, even though the answer revolted him, it always came out the same. So then when they both go to sleep, and then they're both having dreams that they are married to each other, and Helga's is this over-idealistic marriage where she's just very much the boss. So it's like, that's it, I'm running for president, and he's just kind of there, like, to support her every step of the way. So that's its own extreme. And it's funny, though, in the dream where she has 2 eyebrows, because, of course, her classic one eyebrow, that's so part of her character, the one eyebrow. A lot of characters have one eyebrow, though, also Harold's, too, and many others, but Big Bob, too. And then Arnold with his dream, and how it's just him having to work at Big Bob's Beeper Emporium unloading the boxes, and then she's just at home eating junk food, lying around the house all day, and then when the stork comes, they go, stork brought him when they got their little babies, and he's like, we've only been married 2 days, and she's like, well, I guess it's all it takes. Little jokes like that. But Helga at the end of her dream is just so funny at the very end, and she's like, oh, Arnold, oh, pastrami. I love that. Oh gosh. And then at the end of Arnold's dream is really interesting when he's like, I know you're not this mean, and if we're going to be married to each other, I want you to start showing it, like being nice. And she's saying, okay, well, I guess you've seen through my mean exterior into my mushy center, and the truth is, I actually don't hate you. I sort of like you. I sort of really, really like you. In fact, you could say I love, and then he wakes up. And that was always interesting to me because it was like subconsciously he knew all along. Like, yes, he always knew deep down that she wasn't that mean, but his subconscious telling him that this is the reason she's so mean to you all the time. So I always just liked that. And then one of my all-time favorite episodes to this day is a fan favorite and one of Craig Bartlett's favorites, Helga on the Couch, where we really go in depth with Helga's home life. When that child psychologist, Dr. Bliss, comes to observe the students, and then she quickly observes Helga's anger, and observing Helga in class throwing spitballs at Arnold, and then she recommends that they go talk, and it's just a truly lovely episode, more insight into Helga's character, why she is the way she is, seeing her upbringing, and how the whole point is for her to express herself in a more constructive manner instead of taking out all of her anger on Arnold. And I remember watching that episode as a kid for the first time, and since it was a 2-parter, it was a half-hour episode, and then when she's like, we can talk about Arnold? And I was like, oh, yes, things are gonna get real now. I remember that as a kid, being like, yes, finally, get to the root of it all. Oh my gosh. It's just a lovely episode, just advocating for seeing a therapist and getting your feelings out there and working on yourself. So that's lovely in and of itself. But just also certain things, having rewatched it just recently now, like how Helga's just moving around the room as she grows increasingly comfortable. Like first when she's throwing darts, or when it's like, how about you sit on the couch, when Dr. Bliss was getting her first to warm up to her, and it's like, oh no, Doc, I'm not, you think I play your little game like just to warm up to her, when then they're doing jump rope and all that, and then it's like the word associations, the ink blots, and then it starts to turn a little when she's saying, oh well, try having a sister who's so perfect, and then that's when she starts to open up, Helga, talking about her sister, and then she's saying, well, that's awfully sad that no one notices you at home. And just a random funny thing though, just I want to point out, because I never noticed it as a kid, when she's playing the piano, Olga, and poor little Helga, and she's little, going to preschool. I'm going to preschool. But then when Big Bob says, you should hear her play Beethoven, Miriam, that made me burst out laughing when I hadn't remembered that at all. Goodness. Talk about uncultured. And then it's so devastating. This poor little 3-year-old going to preschool in the rain, and dog steals her lunch, and then of course the ray of sunshine that is Arnold, with his immediate kindness with her, with holding his umbrella and saying, I like your bow because it's pink like your pants. And it's just, that is the starting point, obviously, of when she meets him and falls in love with him right on the spot, because the first person to ever show her true kindness, the first person to truly notice her, and that's where her obsession begins. And then we see how she's just like has her little sigh, and then the kids are making fun of her. That's when she just immediately turns and just shuts it all down and just becomes so angry. It's like, I'm the boss here, just because she was teased. So she can't just freely, openly express her feelings, and she's mocked, and then she's embarrassed. And then when she has her little version of her locket as a kid, though, then when it's just the little taped heart with the little taped picture of Arnold, and it's just so adorable, the construction paper heart, and she's like, I love you, Arnold, I didn't want to marry you, and then she hits Brainy in the face even then. And then when Dr. Bliss finally draws it out of her, she's saying, why'd you need that minute alone? And then she says, Helga, if you want to get something off your chest, like how you really feel about Arnold, now would be the great time to do it. And then she's saying, she's sworn to secrecy. It's like, even if I ripped out your tongue, like whatever she says, like even if someone put you in a cage with starving rats, even then Helga, I still wouldn't tell. And then there's of course that explosion of emotions, I love Arnold, and then just going on, and then it's just, now we're getting somewhere. And then she's saying, well, you said it and the world didn't end, did it? It's like, see, that was easier than you thought it was, wasn't it? And she just lets her know that it's okay, that you feel your emotions strongly, that you're very creative. And then she's saying, well, so you love Arnold and you're scared to tell him because he might not love you back, but you'll never know how he feels until you tell him. And then she's saying, well, you could tell him when you're ready. So it's just a wonderful, constructive thing that just needs to be heard. And then she's saying, we could talk again. So that's the only time we see Dr. Bliss, but I have to wonder, I guess Helga did then go to therapy starting from then. And then it's like she's a whole new person, feeling like, oh, it's the new honest me. That it's great that she has like this weight lifted off of her shoulders. And then of course she crashes into Arnold and she's like, I just want to say, like she was going to possibly say it right then and there. So kudos to her for her bravery, but then she loses her nerve. She's like, oh, he doesn't get it. He doesn't know my secret. Can't he see that I adore him? And then Brainy just shows up with the ring, and then it's just very meta. It's like, look, Brainy, how'd you know I was here? I mean, were you waiting in this alley? It's like, look, I'm not going to hit you, but tomorrow look out. And she pats his cheek, and he just passes out. Poor Brainy. So he's got his own feelings for Helga, obviously. But so that episode is just incredible with the lovely insight into Helga's character. Truly one of the best episodes of the series, for sure. And another episode I absolutely always love from the series is Parents' Day. And I remember that episode, I still don't know. I wonder why it was held back for whatever reason. It didn't air until season 4 or 5. I just remember, though, I was Arnold's age at the time when that episode finally aired. I was 9 years old. And I remember, in fact, the commercials for this episode, and that scene in particular when Arnold's parents are saying goodbye to Arnold when he's a baby, and he's like, bye, Mommy, bye, Daddy. And I just remember thinking, like, oh my God, we're actually going to see Arnold's parents after all this time, because that's when Craig decided, let's finally do an episode where we find out why Arnold's parents aren't around. And of course, they're incredible, amazing people. His parents, Miles, voiced by Craig, and Stella, voiced by Antoinette Stella, who co-wrote the episode, in fact. And it's just that truly sad side to Arnold. He doesn't have his parents, and they have that parents' tournament weekend, and then he's got his grandparents, but it's just not the same for him. And that horrible moment when Bob calls him an orphan, and then even Helga's like, Dad, like that's just so truly horrible. And then when she goes to apologize to him, saying, oh, you don't have any parents. He doesn't have to point it out. Like, oh my goodness, oh, she tried. That was her trying to make him feel better. But, I don't know how well that went. She's like, I think that went very well. And it's that rare moment, too, with Arnold's grandparents where, since Grandpa Phil always tells him stories about his parents, and he just kind of embellishes things here and there. But then when he's saying, well, you guys are great and all, but you're not my parents. And then a rare moment with Gertie since she's always so crazy and over the top, when she's just being serious and just, he needs you, Phil, you better go talk to him. And it's really heartbreaking. And then we learn the truth about Arnold's parents, and then when they went on that plane ride, and then he just says they never came back because they had that one last mission. And then he's saying the plane was never found. And then Arnold ever with his hopefulness saying they could just be lost, maybe someday they'll come back. And the ending to that episode moves me to tears. The score, first of all, just that theme with that gorgeous piano music, Jim Lang's composition, it's just absolutely gorgeous. And it's just so touching and just fragile and just beautiful. That scene always stood out to me, watching that as a kid for the first time, when Arnold, it's like he's dreaming. He puts on the scarf and he just puts on the goggles and he goes in the plane, mirroring when his parents took off. in the plane for the last time, and then Arnold's mom's looking at the picture of Arnold. So that always stood out to me, that it was just that ray of hope, and that it's like he set out to find his parents, and then as a kid, I told myself I knew he's going to find them someday, that they're not gone, and it just was just so incredible, and just truly capturing the overall theme of this series to me, which is to always have hope, that even with all the bad stuff, just if you have that one ray of hope, that's all you need to just keep going. So that scene to me encompasses the entire spirit of this show and just everything that makes it so wonderful. But also just a couple other ones to point out. Then after the movie, there were the 2 episodes produced, April Fool's Day and The Journal. And of course, we know The Journal was a prequel to the Jungle movie that unfortunately was never made until years and years later, when we finally got it. After all those years, we finally got that closure. Oh my goodness. But by that point in the series run, those were the last 2 episodes of the series, and that was when Arnold had yet another voice actor, Alex D. Lintz. I actually thought he was really good. I remember at the time being like, oh my god, Arnold has a different voice again, but he sounds similar to Spencer Klein, but he also has different nuances to the character too that I appreciate more so now. But I remember at the time watching that April Fool's Day episode and being like, something's off about this Hey Arnold episode, and it was partly that with the voice. And also, Sid had a new voice. He was actually by then voiced by Sam's younger brother, and Stinky's voice really deep too, and Helga too, because at that point, I mean, Francesca Marie Smith was a teenager in her mid-teens, so she really grew up with the character, as they all did. But so there was like a mismatch there with Arnold and Helga with the voice actors. But I will say, having just rewatched it now, I do like that episode. It's a fun episode. It's an interesting episode, because it's also interesting when you know that what Craig has said in an interview with Aaron Mehta, in fact, that this was after the movie, so Arnold by then knew Helga's feelings for him. So that's interesting to watch it then with that lens. But, I mean, if you take it at the surface level, though, you could just watch it that way, too, since you can interpret it in many ways. But I remember, though, at the time watching it with that whole scene where Arnold is walking Helga home and she's pretending she's blind because he gave her that gift box that was the gag gift that when the person opens it, there's a blinding light. So then when she gets her sight back, but then she pretends like, oh, I'll just milk this for all it's worth, just to make Arnold her seeing eye dog. So then that scene when she's like, oh, Arnold, watch the cab. It's like, oh, good thing I smelled that cab. So my whole point, that whole scene, though, I was like, this is a rehash of, or I didn't say rehash as a kid, but this is a repeat of Beamed. It felt like her just pretending amnesia and now pretending she's blind. But, so just that, though. And then when they're at the dance, and then there's that whole scene when they tango, Arnold and Helga, because why wouldn't there be an April Fool's dance, first off? And then it's funny when Eugene's campaigning to be the King of Fools. It's like, oh, you vote for me for the King of Fools? And then Rhonda's like, I truly couldn't care less. But anyway, so then when Helga tells Phoebe that she's not actually blind, and then Gerald overhears, and then he's like, you better give Helga Pataki a taste of her own medicine. So then that whole scene with Arnold and Helga dancing, I remember watching that scene as a kid, and I can tell you what I thought at the time as an 11-year-old watching that scene was, whoa, when did Arnold get so hot? Oh my gosh, because he just feels so out of character. He's just like purposely being aggressive with the dancing. He's like, don't worry, my poor blind friend. And she's like, Arnold, you're being kind of rough. And really it's because he's getting back at her with the prank that she's pulling on him. She's not actually blind. But so there's many ways to interpret it. But what Craig has said, that he's actually kind of flirting with her a little bit, because it's like he knows she's insanely in love with him, and he's just kind of wishing she would drop this whole act. So watching it now, though, I don't see it as malicious. I see it more him wanting to just pay back for that. And then when he's like, oh, there's something I'm meaning to tell you, I've just been waiting for the right moments. Like, the King of Fools is you, Arnold. It's like, actually, it's you, Helga. And he just he spins her into the water. So that's just an interesting scene with them dancing, and Craig had said that it's just like a part where it's just like the two of them dancing, kind of caught in the moment. So it's just really interesting to me. And then, of course, there's the journal, absolutely tearjerker of an episode, and it sets up the Jungle movie. And then, of course, it ends up that hopeful yet cliffhanger note of, Grandpa, you have to see this. I found a map. So this series just is absolutely wonderful. It holds up so well. Obviously, it's not perfect. There are episodes I don't care for at all, but overall, love the characters. I do love Arnold, but Helga's an incredible character, since there's just so much complexity to her. And so I could go on and on about each of these characters. There's just so much to talk about with this show, but this episode's already running long, so with all that being said, I do have a Hey Arnold short story to share. It's simply titled Care. So here we go. Without further ado, it's story time. No matter how hard she tried to ignore it, Helga couldn't stop herself from staring at the only empty desk in the room. Her gaze kept gravitating towards it against her will, as if in some wild, foolish hope that maybe, if she stared at it long enough, he'd walk in and take his seat where he belonged. She'd insult him, he'd get annoyed with her, but he wouldn't say anything because he was too nice, too forgiving, and thus status quo would be restored. Sadly, this wasn't the case at all, and every time Helga looked at that empty desk, her face fell a little bit farther, and her heart sank a little bit lower. It was actually ironic in a sad kind of way. She obsessed over him endlessly, to the point where she'd find herself so distracted by his presence she could barely concentrate while sitting in class. But who would have thought his absence would have had the same, if not even more powerful effect on her? Her infatuation truly had no bounds. She was fully aware of this, always had been in fact, and although she knew how absolutely pathetic it was to harbor such an unhealthy level of affection for a boy she so shrewdly pretended to despise, she never could bring herself to stop. And until she someday worked up the courage to tell him just how much she adored him with all her heart and soul, for now she was fine with simply worshipping him in secrecy. Which was why, for the time being, she allowed her thoughts of him to roam freely, despite being filled with concern from the moment Mr. Simmons announced the grim and downright devastating news that Arnold had come down with a bad case of the flu and wouldn't be in school today. Sympathetic murmurs had rippled throughout the classroom, a chorus of worry led by Gerald, who'd vouched that Arnold hadn't looked too good to him when they'd hung out the day before. Helga had clutched her hands to her chest as a suffocating wave of anguish crashed against her heart at the thought of Arnold falling so ill. She spent the rest of the day in limbo, so consumed with her worried thoughts about her sweet beloved Arnold to the point where she couldn't even muster up the strength to do so much as toss a fiery glare at anyone who'd happened to accidentally bump into her in the hallway, or take the last fruit cup at lunch, or do anything even remotely irritating that would normally get on her nerves. When it came down to it, without Arnold around, nothing else seemed to matter to her. And so she decided the minute school was over, she'd rush to his house and sneak up to his roof to catch a glimpse of him through his bedroom window, if only to make sure he was recuperating and sleeping soundly, so that she could finally put herself at ease. When the 3:00 bell rang, she hastily gathered up her things, ready to make a break for the door, but before she'd even gotten out of her seat, Mr. Simmons held up his hand. "Class, before you all depart for the day, I need a volunteer to go to Arnold's house and deliver him today's homework assignments." At that, Helga froze. An actual legitimate reason to visit Arnold, and with a chance to go into his house to check on him, all without being a creepy stalker? It seems too good to be true. If only she could figure out a way to seize the opportunity without actually having to volunteer to do it herself, and risk all the questionable glances she'd undoubtedly receive from her idiotic classmates. "I assume you'd like to do it, Gerald?" Mr. Simmons asked. And just like that, Helga's heart sank all over again. Of course it had to be too good to be true. Such was her life. "Actually," Gerald said, a regretful tone to his voice that had Helga perking up, "as much as I want to, I can't. I'm all booked up for after school today. I hope Arnold will understand." "I'm sure he will. Nothing to worry about," Mr. Simmons said. His eyes scanned the classroom until his gaze landed on none other than, "Helga, how about you?" Helga's heart stopped beating for a second. "Me?" she asked with sudden breathlessness. "This is your chance, Helga. Don't blow it." "Well, I guess I could. I mean, it's not like Arnold's house is too far away or anything, but..." She could feel herself losing her nerve, only for it to shatter completely as she crossed her arms and snapped, "Why would I want to waste my time going to that football head's house when I've got way more important things to do with my life?" "And you blew it. Nice going, Helga." "I see," Mr. Simmons said with a solemnness to his voice, as if masking his underlying disappointment in her. "In that case, perhaps you, Lila, could..." "Hold on a sec, Teach," Helga said in a hurry, fueled by the spike of enraged heat she always felt at the mention of Lila's name. "I forgot that I have to stop by Mr. Green's butcher shop to pick up some lamb chops for my mom. Yeah. And since Arnold's house happens to be on that same block anyway, I guess I could swing by and drop off his dumb books for him or whatever." "Really?" Mr. Simmons said, and he smiled now. "All right then, thank you, Helga. I admire the fact that you're willing to do such a kind gesture for one of your classmates." Yeah, I'm a selfless person, I know," Helga said, bringing her book so tightly to her chest she could feel her heart pounding against the cover of her geometry textbook. "Well, in that case, you'll need Arnold's locker combination," Mr. Simmons said. "I already know it," Helga said without thinking, only for her eyes to pop open as wide as they could possibly go. Mr. Simmons gave her a quizzical look, and some of the kids stared at her, too, their eyebrows scrunched suspiciously. Thinking fast, she gave their teacher a forceful grin as she said, "I mean, yes, you're right, thanks." Mr. Simmons stared at her for what felt like far too long, but thankfully, the doubtful look on his face went away as he turned away from her and headed to his desk. Helga welcomed the relieved drop of her shoulders as she sighed deeply. That was a close one. She seemed to be making those embarrassing slip-ups more and more lately. Granted, it was usually pretty easy to cover them up, but the worst, of course, is when they happened in front of Arnold. And now she'd be going to his house to visit him while he lay in his bed sick as a dog. Who knew what kind of intimate secrecies would spew out of her mouth if she stayed too long? The thought alone brought a crippling sense of alarm upon her. Clearly this wasn't one of her brightest ideas. She realized the only way to avoid making any sort of humiliating confessions whatsoever would be to simply drop off Arnold's things and get out of there without actually going up to his room to see him. It was decided then. That was her new plan, and she was going to stick to it even if it killed her. Remember, whatever you do, do not go up to his room. She reminded herself of this extremely crucial detail the entire way to Arnold's house, even as she knocked on the front door of the boarding house. Almost instantly, Arnold's grandpa answered, and he put a hand to his bony hip. "Well now, look who it is," he said with an amused grin. "You're Arnold's little classmate, aren't you? Came by to drop off his schoolwork, is that right? Well, short man's asleep in his room, so you can go ahead and bring his books up to him." "Thanks," Helga said, walking in. Okay, so she was weak. Truly embarrassingly weak. At least she could admit it. She still had enough self-control to restrain herself from spending no more than a few minutes tops in his house. That was all she really needed anyway. She'd leave his homework on his desk, watch him sleep for a minute or two, in a totally non-creepy way, of course, and be on her way. The best part was that she could do it all without Arnold ever having known she'd stopped by. It was perfect. Of course, in retrospect, she should have known better. After all, when did anything ever go according to plan for Helga G. Pataki? Clutching his books in one hand, she grasped the doorknob with the other. As she twisted it open, it occurred to her that this would in fact be the first time she actually entered Arnold's room through the door like a normal person, as opposed to sneaking in through one of the windows, or crawling through a vent, or hiding inside the closet, or her personal favorite, inside the wall behind the couch. Boy, I really am sick, aren't I? She didn't have time to dwell on that sickness, for the second she poked her head into Arnold's room and saw him lying in his bed, all else was forgotten. If there were any last remaining doubts about the severity of his illness, they were entirely gone now. He was indeed asleep, although he hardly looked peaceful at all. His unnaturally flushed face pinched in discomfort as he lay there in a restless slumber. Driven by the rush of heartache over seeing her darling Arnold in such a state of affliction, Helga walked up to him, gently dropping his books to the ground when she reached his bed. She clasped her hands in front of her chest and stared at him in silent vigilance. Her heart throbbed with both pity and wonder, as she wasn't used to admiring him so up close like this. Yet at the same time, she hated seeing him in such an ailing condition. If only I could find a way to soothe you, even with nothing more than a simple touch. With that thought consuming her mind and taking over her limbs, before she could even realize the risk of what she was about to do, her hand reached out of its own accord, and she cupped her palm against Arnold's forehead. His skin was hot to the touch, burning beneath her fingertips, as if desperately beckoning her to bring him a cooling sense of relief. With a gentleness she never knew she possessed, Helga let her fingers graze his overheated skin, brushing aside his soft golden tufts of hair along the way. He drew in a breath, and she immediately retracted her hand, fearfully waiting with bated breath for him to wake up. He exhaled but otherwise didn't stir, and finally she brought her hand back down, this time to touch his cheek. She was very much aware of the dangers behind her actions, knowing he could easily wake up at any given moment, but even with that knowledge, she couldn't bring herself to stop what she was doing. Maybe she was a thrill-seeker. Maybe it was worth the risk. Whatever the case, she softly stroked his cheek, all the while studying his features, particularly his pale, parted lips, trying to memorize every inch of his scorching skin. Arnold stirred suddenly, and Helga's worst nightmares became a reality when he opened his eyes. Her heart hammered in her chest, and yet she found herself frozen, staring down at him, with her hand resting against his cheek. He stared up at her in a groggy, half-conscious daze, eyes glazed but otherwise unreadable. Her breath got stuck in her throat as reality hit her with the weight of an 18-wheeler, and her overwhelming sense of dread only intensified when Arnold opened his mouth to speak, his voice a raspy, confused whisper. "Helga?" Well, it was going to be a lot harder to cover this one up, that was for sure. Her face splitting with a nervous grin, Helga removed her hand from his face and let out a shaky laugh, wiggling her fingers at him. "Just checking your vital signs," she said, and mentally slapped a hand to her forehead. "Oh, brother, that was brilliant," her subconscious scorned. "Like he's really going to fall for that one. You're a goner, Helga." "What are you doing here?" Arnold asked, sounding really out of it, his voice thick with congestion. He brought up a hand and coughed into it. Helga felt a pang of sympathy in her chest over how awful he sounded, even worse than he looked. Inadvertently, she found her usual anger softening as she threw up both of her hands, more so out of desperation than anything else. "What do you think I'm doing here? I came to drop off your books, doy," she said in a much more defensive tone than necessary, only to put her hands on her hips and smirk slightly. "And here I thought you were faking, but sheesh, now I can't help but feel a little sorry for ya. Anyway, I'm sure you want me to get out of your hair so you can go back to sleep, so I'll just be on my way now. Take it easy, Arnoldo." She turned her back to him and headed for the door, even though she wanted nothing more than to stay a little while longer, to be alone with him and comfort him in any way she possibly could. But she knew there was no point. After all, she was Helga, rude and bossy and callous, or at least that was the girl everyone knew her as. She reached the door, about to leave, when the sound of Arnold's weak voice brought her to a stop. "You actually did something nice like that for me?" Her eyes widened, and she turned around to see Arnold staring at her with that half-lidded gaze of his, a hint of a tender smile on his face. It sent her heart in a frenzy, and brought an eruption of butterflies to her stomach. Her feelings overpowering her, she brought a hand to her arm and rubbed it up and down, looking away in embarrassment. "Well, yeah, I guess, if you want to think of it that way, but don't go getting the wrong idea, okay? I mean, it's not like I wanted to come here," she said, a blatant lie, but he didn't need to know that. "After your so-called best friend Geraldo went and bailed on you, Mr. Simmons pretty much forced me into coming here instead. So what other choice did I have? I definitely wasn't worried about you or anything." "Oh, criminy, why did I just say that? What is wrong with me? Get it together, Helga." Despite her state of inner panic, she looked back at Arnold, only to see him smiling even more. There was a gentle playfulness to the way he was looking at her, as if he knew the truth himself, that she had indeed been worrying about him all day long, because she cared about him more than he'd ever know. Regardless, seeing that adorable little smile on his face managed to send Helga's wildly beating heart over the edge. Thankfully, she controlled herself enough to not have a gushy outburst, and she purposely reeled in her shock by putting on her usual display of annoyance. "What the heck are you smiling about?" "Nothing," Arnold said, his smile never faltering. "Just, thanks for bringing me my books. That was really sweet of you." Taken aback by his light-hearted tone, Helga simply blinked, and now she found herself unable to drop even the slightest bit of harshness to her voice. Yeah, you're welcome," she said, falling uncomfortably silent for a second, when finally she shook herself out of it and managed more of a spark. "Now go back to sleep, would ya? That fever has got you acting all loopy, and try not to die while you're at it too, okay?" "Okay, Helga," Arnold said, shutting his eyes. Helga stood there for a moment, a soft smile of her own involuntarily spreading over her face, one that stayed intact even after she left, while Arnold drifted off into a much more relaxed and contented slumber. All right, that was Care. So a couple things with that. First off, I realize it's quite contrived with Mr. Simmons telling the class that he needs a volunteer to bring Arnold his books and then just calling on people. That was just a little contrived. I realize that, but I mean, of course Helga's not going to willingly volunteer, so of course she has to have her excuse just because he called on her. Also, with this Hey Arnold story I wrote, because I have several others which put a pin in that. I'll get to a few others eventually, but with this one in particular, I think of Arnold from seasons 2 and 3, that version of Arnold. So that's just when I wrote it, that's what I had in mind. So again, absolutely love this series, and you may have noticed I didn't mention the Jungle movie. Stay tuned for that. I will get to that in its own episode. But for now, I just absolutely love Hey Arnold. It's a wonderful show. Just so much to love and praise about it. And you're a bold kid, Arnold. And with that, that's going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. You can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Storytelling Saga, as well as on Twitter at Storytell Saga. You can also send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by leaving me a message in the contact section of storytellingsaga.com or by sending me an email at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, you gotta wobble before you stand. I'll be discussing Kiki's delivery service. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.